Okay. Now, so last meeting we have done already with the phase or the first phase of database planning and design, wherein we have done already gathering information that is needed on our database system. So the first phase of database planning and design is no other than the data definition, wherein we are going to gather information. We're going to create different field names that is needed for our database system. This time, we're now going to proceed on the second phase of database planning and design, and that is now what we call the data refinement. So to start with, we have here our objective. For the first objective, we are going to identify the purpose of our database system. Second, determine the field names of the database and perform the field definition principle. So, data refinement, nakalagay po sa ating module that the definition of the data refinement is to refine or modify the gathered information that is needed into our database. So, refine, iaayos natin yung mga information na nagather na natin that we have done in our data definition. So, yun po yung definition niya sa ating module. So, reminder, I'm not going to show you any more different definition kasi nandun na po yan sa ating module. So, in order for me to explain to you how are you going to do the data refinement, I'm just going to show you only some examples on how to do the data refinement na lang po. Okay, so let's say for example, we're going to create a database. Okay, of course, before we proceed creating or before we create our database, we need to think first the title of the database. So since you are a student and it is a very mas magandang example will be yung mga related po sa student. So that's why we are going to create a student information system. Let's say for example, we're going to create a database that's named Student Information System. After we identify the title of our database, ito nasa data definition na naman tayo. After we identify the name of our database, we are going to identify also the purpose of our database. We're going to create a purpose of our database. Syempre, hindi naman po pwede nagagawa tayo ng database ng walang purpose. So, na-discuss na din po natin ito kung paano gumawa ng purpose. I guess video discussion yata yung ginawa ko because I'm not feeling well during that time. So, for the first purpose, example, ang first purpose natin is we are going to store and display records of students' personal information. Then, second, we're going to store and display records of students' subject information. So, as you can see on the purpose, it is specified what kind of information are we going to store for our database. So, ganyan po tayo gumawa ng purpose ha. We need to identify what kind or we need to specify what kind of information are we going to store or are we going to display. Okay, so personal information and subject information. Hindi po pwede na information lang. Kasi later on, gagawa kayo ng sarili ninyong database wherein you're going to create your own purpose. Next, we're now going to identify, after we identify the purpose of our database, we're now ready to identify or create our field name based on the purpose. So, based on the purpose, nakalagay dyan, we're going to store personal information and subject information. Ano nga ba yung mga iba't ibang kinds of information or ano nga ba yung mga iba't ibang field names na pwede nating i-identify that is pertaining to the personal information? Of course, from the word personal information, kakailanganin natin dyan ng first name because it is pertaining on our personal information, right? And of course, after first name, we have also the last name. Last name, next will be middle initial, gender, subject grade. Subject grade is pertaining to what? Is it still a personal information? Of course, it is now pertaining on the subject information. So, we can create subject grade is pertaining to the subject information kasi nga it talks about or pertaining to the information of our subject. So, yung grade natin sa ating subject. Next, we have also the age pertaining to the personal information. Subject name. Pag sinabi nating subject name, an example of subject name is the English. That is a record. Math is also a record. So, reminder na discuss naman na natin kung anong pagkakaiba ng table, record, and field names. Wag wag po kayong malilito sa field names and records. Magkaiba po si field names at saka si records. We have also this section, birth date, grade level, street, city, municipality, province, country, teacher's last name, teacher's first name, and of course, teacher's middle initial. Okay? Always remember that a field name is a description of the record. Kasi napansin ko sa inyo, yung maiba sa inyo, during the field definition principle, wherein breaking down of field names, pag break down nyo yung field names, nagiging record. So, may mga sumagot dyan sa mga first name or dun sa name, sinulat nila yung pangalan nila. Reminder, yung pangalan ninyo is a record, that is not a field name. Okay, and another, meron din mga nagsulat dun sa subject grade, dun sa mga grades, or dun sa grades. Pag breakdown natin ng grades, may mga nagsulat na mga grades nila. Okay, hindi po pwede yun because that is a record. So, pag i-breakdown natin si grade, magiging saan ba nahati-hati ang grade natin? Sa first quarter, second quarter, third quarter. Kung hindi nyo naiintindihan yung quarter, o di gawin natin first grading, second grading, third grading, fourth grading, something like that. Okay? So, nahati siya sa 4. Pwede rin mahati siya sa 5 kasi meron pa tayong tinatawag na average. Okay? So, yun po ang pagkakaiba ng field names and record. So, after we identify the field names, then this is now the time that we are going to perform the data refinement. From the word data refinement, we are going to eliminate unnecessary information, and of course, we're going to add the necessary information that we need for our database system. Pero, to do that, another purpose of data refinement, we're also going to assign the different field names or these following field names into their respective table. Now, how are we going to identify the table of our database? Hindi naman po pwedeng gumawa na lang tayo ng basta-basta na table. Okay, diba sabi ko last time that working with database means working with table. Pero hindi naman po pwedeng gumawa ng basta-basta na table. So, we need to identify first what kind of table that is needed for our database. So, take a look on your purpose. Dito pa lang sa purpose, makikita na natin kung ano, or dito talaga sa purpose tayo magbe-base. Lahat sa purpose tayo magbe-base. Makikita natin dyan kung anong information or anong table ang gagawin natin. Anong table ang i-identify natin at ilang table ang gagawin natin for our database. So, it says there, store. From the word store, ibig sabihin, i-store tayo. Ano bang tagal ng store? Para magtatago. Parang ganon. So, magko-collect. Okay, magko-collect tayo ng information. Aside from magko-collect, magpapakita tayo ng information. So, anong i-store natin? Personal information ni student. So, kailangan ba natin ng isang container dito sa personal information? Of course, yes. So, personal information is one table na po. Kasi nga, from the word store, ibig sabihin, maglalagay or mag-i-store tayo, magko-collect tayo. Pag nag-collect tayo, lalagay natin sa isang table which named as personal information. Kasi personal information lang naman naka-indicate dyan. Then another, store ulit. Okay? Magko-collect tayo, ilalagay natin sa table. So, we're going to store subject information naman. So, that will be our second table. Okay? So, that will be our second table. So, ilang table ang gagawin natin for our database? Okay? 2 lang po. The personal information and the subject information kasi yun lang ang naka-indicate sa ating purpose. Okay? So, kung wala sa ating purpose, wag po natin gagawin. Okay? Kasi magkakaroon na kayo ng bugs dyan, magkakalituhan na po tayo dyan. Okay? So, personal information, we identify already our table, personal information, then the subject information. What are we going to do next? We're going to assign the collected or we're going to assign the identified field names into their respective table. Okay? So, sino-sino ngayon ang kabilang sa personal information? So, reminder, in assigning the different field names to the table, you need to always remember that the field name should pertain to this table. Okay, it should pertaining to this table. Example, the first name, is it pertaining to the personal information? Of course, yes. How about the subject grade? Is it pertaining to the personal information? Of course not. Okay, subject grade is pertaining to the subject information. Okay, something like that. How about the teacher's last name? Is it pertaining to the personal information? Is that a personal information of the student? Of course not. That is now a subject information. Okay, that's why if we are going to assign this following field names into their respective table, this will be the expected result. Okay, so we have the personal information, or we have the different field names under the personal information, which is the first name, middle initial, last name, gender, age, section, birth date, grade level, street, city, municipality, province, and country. While the subject information will be subject name, subject grade, teacher's last name, teacher's first name, and of course, lastly is teacher's middle initial. Okay, so that is how are you going to assign the following field names to their respective table. But before you assign the following field names, you need to understand first the purpose of your database, because through the purpose, you will identify now the you will be able to identify now the table that is needed for our database and the number of table that is needed for our database. Okay, next. So let's say for example, we implemented this table to the database. So example, ginawa na natin tong database na to. Then, I have here the field names. So ito yung field names. Field names is describing what kind of information are you going to store to this column. Okay? To this column. So, i-describe nyo. Let's say for example, first name. Anong ilalagay natin dyan? Ilalagay ba natin yung apelyido natin? Of course not. We are going to put there our first name. So, it is describing what kind of information are we going to store into a certain column under the table. Okay? Now, so, example, meron na tayo ditong records. Then, we have now our records, the table. We have now our field names. Naka-assign na siya. Ginagamit na natin siya. Now, the question is, how are we going to identify kung kanino itong mga subject na to? How are we going to know kung ano ang mga subject ni Mr. Tom? Ano ang mga subject ni Miss Jenny? Okay? So, how are we going to know kung ano yung mga grades ni Mr. Tom? At ano ang mga grades ni Miss Jenny? Kung pupunta naman tayo sa subject information, hindi naman natin malalaman kasi nakalagay lang dyan is subject name, subject grade, teacher's last name, teacher's first name, and teacher's middle initial. Okay. Now, dito na ngayon papasok ang pag-a-add natin ng necessary information kasi nakita na natin during the data refinement na kailangan pa natin ng another field name. And that is no other than the student ID. Okay? We need to use the student ID. Hindi ba't sa isang estudyante, meron lang tayong isang student ID. Hindi po pwedeng ma-duplicate yung student ID natin. Hindi po pwedeng madoble yung student ID natin. So, dapat unique yung student ID natin. So, since unique ang ating student ID, so, gagamitin na natin ngayon si student ID bilang pagkilala kung ano yung mga subject na meron kay Mr. Tom. Okay? So, through the student ID, alam na natin kung ano yung mga subject ni Mr. Tom. So, student ID ni Mr. Tom is 001. So, nakalagay dito sa student ID ng English is 001. So, ibig sabihin, may English si Mr. Tom. Then, ito yung English ni Mr. Tom, and ito yung grade niya, and ito yung teachers niya. Then, mayroon din siyang math. Kasi nga, 001 nakalagay si student ID. Science, Filipino, and of course, TLA, 002 na siya. So, 002 na siya. Since 002 na siya, then that is now the subject of Miss Jenny. So, yan na po yung grade ni Miss Jenny. At yan din po yung mga teachers ni Miss Jenny. Okay, 002, 002 through the student ID. Okay, kasi hindi ba't nauulit naman ang pangalan, pwede namang may magkapangalan, pwede namang may magkaapilyado, pero hindi po pwedeng merong magkaroon ng parehong ID number. That's why we are going to use the ID number of the student. Now, Since unique si ID number dito sa ating personal information, we are going to assign the student ID under the personal information table as the primary key. Now, kung naka-assign yung student ID natin na sa primary key, ibig sabihin yung mga field names na yan or yung field name na student ID, it is now accepting only a unique value. Ibig sabihin, pag dinoble ko ang 001 dito sa aking student ID, hindi po tatanggapin ng student ID kasi nga naka-assign na siya as primary key. So, pag ginawa akong 001, itong 002, magkakaroon na po ng error na hindi po pwedeng i-accept ang duplicated value. So, ibig sabihin, magiging unique lang talaga ang ating student ID. At ang tawag natin doon is primary key. So, once we said primary key, it is accepting only a unique value. Okay? Now, question, ano naman ang tawag natin sa mga pwedeng maduplicate kagaya ng student ID sa subject information? Itong student ID sa subject information, hindi natin i-assign na sa primary key, pero since hindi natin siya in-assign na sa primary key, ito na yung tinatawag nating foreign key. Okay, bakit natin siya ginawang foreign key? Hindi ba't sa isang estudyante pwedeng magkaroon ng madaming subject? Okay? So, sa isang estudyante, pwedeng magkaroon ng madaming subject. Hindi naman po pwede na yung isang estudyante ay pwedeng magkaroon lang ng isang subject. That's why we assign the student ID under the subject information as the foreign key. At ang tawag na natin doon is one-to-many relationship. Nagkakaroon na ngayon ng relationship si personal information at si subject information through the student ID. Okay? Kasi kinuha natin yung record dito sa personal information, nilagay or ginamit natin dito sa subject information in order for us to identify kung ano yung mga subject ng mga students natin. Okay? So, yung student ID dito sa subject information pwedeng maduplicate kasi nga naka-assign siya as foreign key. Pero dito sa personal information, hindi siya pwedeng maduplicate kasi nga naka-assign siya as a primary key. So, primary key is a unique value while foreign key is accepting only duplicated value. Okay, so yun ang pagkakaiba ng primary key and foreign key. And of course, once we said data refinement, we're going to assign the following field names into their respective table. So, as a summary, so we have created, in order for us to create our database system, we need to identify first the title of our database. After we identify it, then we need to identify or create our purpose. Why are we creating that database? Then, and he will use the database. Then, next is field names. We're going to identify the field names that is needed for our database system based on the purpose. And next is that after we identify the field names, then we're going to perform the data refinement by assigning the different field names into their respective tables. Then, after that, we need to assign also our primary key for the unique value. Kung meron tayong dalawang table at meron silang relationship sa isa't isa, then we need to assign one of them as the primary key so that it will accept only a unique value. Then, yung mga duplicated value, that is now what we call foreign key. Okay, we need to assign our field names into foreign key. Okay, so since nasa module naman lahat yan, kung babasahin nyo yung module ng maigi. So, before I continue, any questions? Saint Isaac? SIJ? Question po?
None, sir.
Okay, if none, then prove to me that you truly understand our discussion. So, sabi ko nga, after our discussion, then we are going to have our recitation. So, graded recitation po tayo. Simple lang naman yung question. Why is data refinement important in creating an efficient database system? Bakit nga ba natin kailangang i-perform ang data refinement sa paggawa ng magandang database system?